As leader of the anti-psychiatry movement, R.D. Laing found international fame and counterculture guru status following the success of books The Divided Self and The Self and Others. Born in Glasgow in 1926, Laing described his middle-class upbringing as socially isolated, rigid and dysfunctional. After graduating with a medical degree in 1952, he served at a UK military hospital during the Korean War before taking up a position at Glasgow Royal Mental Hospital, where he quickly became the youngest consultant in the country. Laing's anti-psychiatry caught the imagination of a post-war generation searching for new ideas. Regarded as a pot-shaming radical, he upturned traditional assumptions about the nature of madness by openly challenging the validity of schizophrenia as a diagnosis.
There's a great danger that psychiatry is going to become a sort of elite police force to punish by means of treatment under the name of cure those people who are not normal.
Traditional psychiatry during the 1950s operated an institutional approach to dealing with madness. The insane were removed to asylums and forced to undergo severe chemical regimes, systems of punishment and electrically induced seizures. Patients were rarely, if ever, talked to. In 1965, Laing created the Philadelphia Association, a psychiatric community project based at Kingsley Hall, London. Staff and residents lived and ate together, free to come and go. No locks were placed on doors and no chemical regimes were enforced. Residents were encouraged to embrace their madness, engage in play, and if necessary, regress to a childlike state during group therapy sessions.
If you're interviewing a patient in a mental hospital ward, then you have a key in your pocket to get out, and the patient hasn't. The gulf in power, in position, is enormous. In the late 50s and early 60s, a number of us who were working as psychiatrists in mental hospitals became increasingly dissatisfied with the setting of the mental hospitals as to work. If I really wanted to get to the bottom of, in one lifetime, of what we were on about in attempting to understand what sanity is or madness is, and who is sane, and if anyone, and who is crazy, if anyone, and what that distinction is, I, for one, would have to come off it. I'd have to come off my perch and level out on a man-to-man basis. When I met another human being who was in a position of being classified by other people as crazy, and on that man-to-man basis, on a level, then I would take my chances, and he would take his when we met. Since 1965, several of us in London were able to set up places where, if we were psychiatrists, we could live if we want, and if we were patients, we could also live. And anyone who lived and who is living now in these places would get no encouragement for playing the part of a psychiatrist or playing the part of a patient. The position here is live and let live.
Is love possible? Is freedom possible? Is the truth possible? Is it possible to be one's actual self with another human being? Is it possible to be a human being anymore? Is it possible to be a person? Do persons even exist?
Socially withdrawn and alienated from even their own experiences, dehumanized and pathologized by diagnostic technicians, Laing intuitively understood the cathartic potential of one human being to another, of a social interaction free from power hierarchy.
Most of the people we meet are likely to be very, very frightened people whose so-called negative symptoms or positive symptoms or tokens of criteria of their disorder are defenses that they're putting up against their fear. So they might actually be so flipped out they're not aware that they're frightened, but we know that they are. So one of the things that one can at least do is to conduct oneself according to the ordinary ground rules of courtesy, politeness, and ways of showing the other person that you respect them as another creature and that you are not going to do anything to them that they don't want done to them. And even then, one's probably not going to do anything to them. One's harmless. That is not immediately apparent to the other person. It's no use saying I'm harmless, because the most harmful people say that. You know, trust me. Give me direct eye contact. You know, I never trust anyone who asks me to trust them. The way that we attend to each other, the way that we treat each other, the way we treat each other is not reified as pills and things as treatment, but the treatment that we give someone is the way we treat that person. It should not be a noun, it should be an active verb. So the way we treat one another is the therapy. Do you love me?
Yes.
Well, believe me.
Yes.
You don't love me. Believe me. You don't love anyone. How could you? And no one loves you. How could they? Except me. It's only because I love you that I'm telling you all this. I think you should take that smile off your face. I love you. You believe me? Well, don't believe me. Just because I say so. Just look into the mirror. Look into your heart of hearts, and you'll see that everything I'm telling you is true. Believe me. But don't believe me because I say so. That's my mother.
I think one of the strongest memories I have is of lying on the floor and thinking that if I could just get into the floor, it's like if I could just flatten myself out enough to get into the floor, then I wouldn't feel what was happening. And to some extent, there are times when I can remember everything up to a particular, or everything around a particular event, but I can't feel it. So, and some of them were quite frightening, and I was threatened with, death on one occasion, and my mother going away, and that sort of thing.
So what was the nature of the physical intimacy he was imposing on you at that time?
I remember being molested or fondled. I have recollections of cunnilingus and attempted fellatio. I don't know that I did, or I mean, I think that it was attempted, and intercourse too, attempted intercourse, and I, you know, it sort of, just sitting here, it's like I am not sure if it was more than attempted, but there are times when I'm clearer on that.
What is it now that particularly bothers you?
I think sometimes I'm struck by the reality that it happened. I think that because I didn't remember it for so long, I spent all of my adolescence, and I was married for a while, and all of these strange things used to happen, and I always felt depressed, and I made suicidal gestures off and on when I was 16 and when I was in my 20s, and I remember telling a teacher in grade 9, I was like 13 years old, I told him I wanted to be catatonic. Like there was always something there, or I always thought there was something there, but there never seemed to be anything there. So I always thought that I was just crazy and trying to get attention and being dramatic and hysterical and all of those things. And then when all of this stuff, when I started to remember these things, and it took a long time, in some ways it was like I was trying to convince myself that it really happened, and I looked for things outside of myself to convince myself. Because in some ways when
you're not convinced entirely then? I mean, it's sometimes
well, you see, I always think that I am convinced, and then I see this guy on the street and I think, my God, that happened to me. And then I think, I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced because I'm so startled by my reaction. And then it's like I have to convince myself all over again.
Why do you have to convince yourself now?
I don't know, but it all, like I start...
Why does it matter whether you're convinced or not? I mean, this wouldn't have upset you nearly so much unless you're making a big issue within yourself of whether you're convinced it actually happened, or whether you're convinced, or you believe it but you don't know it, or sometimes it gets unreal, you can't believe it, or I'm quite convinced. Supposing you, although you can't remember everything, you're not sure whether you can remember everything. You'll never be sure whether you can remember everything. Who can remember everything?
Yeah, something that's haunted me for years, I can assure you.
About everything, but under these circumstances, I would grant a possibility that any sort of combination of intimacy between mouth, genitals, anus, your genitals, his genitals, any other part, any parts of your body and his might have come into that sort of contact, whether you remember it or not. That's possible. I mean, it'd be as well to grant that possibility anyway and get it out of the way. You know, then the worst.
Sure, why not?
Why not? Yeah, right.
That makes things a lot.
Well,
makes things a lot easier already.
It doesn't make you a bad person.
No.
No. So all that might have happened, and you remember some of it. Certainly the future of your life does not depend, I would say, whether or not this nuance actually happened, or whether you actually ever had your father's penis in your mouth.
But for the longest time it did. I mean, it seemed like my future depended on.
I imagine that,
Because-
but you can realise.
Well, yes.
If you can you can absolutely realise now that your future does not depend on that. So, if your future doesn't depend on it, then it's dropped away from you, and and then you're free to remember it instead of it haunting you.
The scientific rationale of the day held schizophrenia to be a medical problem rooted in biology, with environmental factors being secondary or irrelevant. Following a trip to the Mental Research Institute in Palo Alto, California, Laing evolved the use of game theory to understand the lived dynamics within the family homes of schizophrenics.
Laing took 20 couples in Britain, and using a complex series of questionnaires, he analysed how each of them saw the other, moment by moment in their daily life, continually asking them what they secretly thought the other really intended. Following game theory, he then coded the responses and had them analysed by a computer. Out of that, Laing produced matrices which showed how, just as in the Cold War, couples used their everyday actions as strategies to control and manipulate each other. His conclusions were stark, that what were normally seen as acts of kindness and love were in reality weapons used selfishly to exert power and control.
Laing fathered 10 children by 4 women and was well aware of the trauma women faced giving birth.
The mother's taken away from the people she knows. Usually she hasn't met anyone who's going to deliver her child. She's taken away from her husband, from her own parents, from her own children, and taken to a completely strange place. And there she goes into a strange bed to encounter strange touches, smells, sights, sounds.
All very cold.
Just relax. Let everything go loose. Now I'm just going to examine you through the vagina. Okay. Good. Well, that feels nice and right. Just relax. Okay, I'm just going to use a little instrument to break the waters now. I'm just going to put a clip on now that clips onto baby's scalp. We can listen to the baby's heartbeat through
Everyone
Mm-hmm.
is treated as being rather a silly woman who can't cope with the knowledge of what's really going to happen to her. And when I was, and they used the drip and induction, they don't tell you about the induction, they don't tell you what's going to happen, you just sort of cut into a theatre. And it's a feeling like being cashed off to abattoirs or something like that. It was all very cold.
I said, well, explain. Why do I have to have it induced? Or he says, if the baby isn't getting enough nourishment, then it'll be malnourished and the birth will be hard on it. And I thought, yeah, that makes sense. I'll consider it. But why is he pressuring me? I said, well, look, could we make it till next week? I don't mind waiting. I'm comfortable. And I said, if you can show me that the baby is being malnourished, I'll agree. But he kept getting very anxious about the birth and about the welfare, and I kept saying, well, I have nothing to do. I'm sitting at home. It doesn't bother me. Unless something goes wrong, I would prefer nature to take its course. Well, finally, after 3 weeks, I had to go into him twice in that last week. He says, no, I'm for induction. And he got so hot under the collar with my resistance that I finally said, look, maybe it'll be best if I went in and got induced. But I wasn't entirely willing to do it at all.
Laing pioneered workshops for adults to relive the trauma of their own births in order to release suppressed or inherited trauma. Rebirthing became wildly popular in the 70s as part of the holistic movement. During rebirthing, a person would re-experience the struggle of trying to break out of the birth canal, represented by the remaining members of the group surrounding him or her with linked arms.